The tremor gun crackled through the cold morning air outside St. Augustine's chapel. Deacon Marcus Delacroix hit the pavement, his knees buckling under the shock, his cane clattering across the concrete steps he had swept every Sunday for 11 years. Above him stood Officer Ryan Kowalski, 26 years old, chest puffed out, taser still raised like a trophy. "I told you to step back," Kowalski said, his voice flat, almost bored. Around them, the church parking lot filled with gasps. Mrs. Grace Sinclair dropped her purse. A teenager lifted a phone, hands shaking. Reverend Thomas Whitfield froze on the top step, Bible still open in his hand. Marcus lay on the ground, chest heaving, his good gray suit smeared with gravel dust. He was 68 years old. He had buried a wife here. He had baptized 3 grandchildren at this altar. And now he was face down on the same steps, gasping, while a stranger half his age stood over him with a weapon. "Sir, do you understand you're under arrest?" Kowalski said. Marcus said nothing. He simply reached, slow and deliberate, into his jacket pocket. Kowalski's hand snapped to his belt. "Don't you move!" But Marcus wasn't reaching for a weapon. He pulled out a small leather case. He opened it with trembling fingers. Gold letters caught the morning light. The crowd went silent. Kowalski's face drained of color. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, still on one knee, "you have no idea what you just started." Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. I read as many as I can. And if you enjoy powerful justice stories with twists you never see coming, do me a favor and hit like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you stories exactly like this one. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Because, to understand how a deacon ended up on the ground outside his own church, you have to understand who Marcus Delacroix really was, and who he had spent the last decade pretending to be. Marcus Delacroix moved through life the way he moved through a church service, quietly, deliberately, never drawing attention to himself. Every morning at 5:30, he unlocked the side door of St. Augustine's Chapel in the small town of Millbrook Falls, Ohio. He brewed the coffee for the early prayer group. He straightened the hymnals. He swept the steps, rain or shine, because he believed a clean doorway was the first sermon a stranger ever heard. To the congregation, he was simply Deacon Delacroix, a retired postal worker, a widower, a grandfather of 3 who never missed a Sunday and never raised his voice. His granddaughter, Elodie, 13 years old, adored him. Every Friday she rode her bike to his small house on Cypress Lane, and he taught her chess on a board that had belonged to his late wife, Colette. "You always let your opponent think they're winning," he told her once, sliding his knight quietly across the board. "That's when they make mistakes." Elodie had laughed. "You sound like a spy, Grandpa." He had only smiled and said nothing. Because Marcus Delacroix had a life before Millbrook Falls that no one in this town knew about. 22 years with the Federal Bureau, most of it undercover, chasing corruption cases that never made the news. He had walked away from that life the day Colette got sick, choosing bedside vigils over stakeouts, choosing quiet mornings over classified briefings. He thought that part of his life was finished. He believed the badge in his drawer was a relic, not a lifeline. He was wrong, because in Millbrook Falls, a new kind of corruption was growing. One wearing a police uniform, patrolling the very streets around his church, and it was about to collide with him on a Sunday morning that would change everything. Officer Ryan Kowalski had been on the Millbrook Falls police force for 4 years, and in that time he had built a reputation, just not the kind anyone wanted. He was the son of a former deputy chief, and he wore that inheritance like armor. Complaints against him disappeared into folders that never reached a supervisor's desk. Citizens who dared file reports were told there was insufficient evidence. even when their own dash cams told a different story. Kowalski had learned early that confidence covered mistakes. He drove the newest patrol car in the fleet. He wrote more citations than any other officer in the district, and he bragged about it at the precinct like it was a batting average. "You gotta let people know who's in charge," he told a rookie one afternoon, smirking as he adjusted his sunglasses. "Respect isn't earned around here. It's demanded." His sergeant, a tired man named Curtis Halverson, had tried to rein him in more than once. But every time, Kowalski's father made a phone call, and every time the complaint simply evaporated. That Sunday morning, Kowalski had been parked outside St. Augustine's chapel for one reason: a noise complaint from a neighbor about the church bell ringing too early. It was a nothing call, a 5-minute conversation, at most. Instead, he saw an old black man standing near the church steps, cane in hand, calmly asking why a squad car was blocking the handicap ramp. Kowalski didn't see a deacon. He didn't see a grandfather. He saw someone he assumed wouldn't push back. He was about to learn how wrong that assumption was. "Sir, step back from the vehicle," Kowalski said, already stepping out of his cruiser. Marcus blinked, confused. "I'm sorry. You're parked on the ramp. My friend uses a wheelchair. She's arriving in 10 minutes. "That's not your concern." "It is my concern," Marcus said gently. "I'm a deacon here. I just need you to move the car before the service starts." Kowalski's jaw tightened. He hated being corrected, especially in front of a growing crowd of churchgoers arriving for the 9 o'clock service. "You're interfering with a police matter," Kowalski snapped. "There's no matter. I'm asking you to move your car." Kowalski stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell his aftershave. "Back away from me right now." Marcus, calm as ever, raised both hands slightly. Not defensive, simply patient. "I'm not resisting anything. I'm asking a question." That's when Reverend Whitfield came down the steps. "Officer, is there a problem? This is one of our deacons." "Stay out of this," Kowalski barked, without turning his head. And then, in one swift, unnecessary motion, Kowalski drew his taser and fired. Marcus dropped instantly, his body seizing, his cane skittering away. Gasps rippled through the parking lot. A woman screamed. Someone dropped a casserole dish they'd been carrying for the fellowship breakfast, glass shattering across the pavement. Elodie, who had arrived early to help set up the choir room, watched from the doorway, frozen, her hands pressed over her mouth. Her grandfather, the man who taught her chess, who never so much as raised his voice, was on the ground, and it was all being filmed. By the time Marcus could sit upright, 3 more patrol cars had arrived, lights spinning, radios crackling. "Cuff him," Kowalski ordered, still breathing hard from the adrenaline. "Ryan," Sergeant Halverson said, stepping out of his own vehicle, voice tight. "What happened here?" "Non-compliance, resisting a lawful order." Marcus, still catching his breath on the ground, said nothing. He had learned, decades ago, that silence in front of an angry crowd was often safer than the truth. Halvorsen crouched beside him. "Sir, are you able to stand?" "I will be," Marcus said quietly. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people now, phones raised, murmurs rising into open anger. "That's Deacon Delacroix," someone shouted. "He's been serving this church for over a decade." "He didn't do anything," another voice cried. Kowalski, sensing the shifting mood, raised his voice. "Everyone stand back. This is police business." But it was too late. The videos were already uploading. Comments were already flooding in. By the time Marcus was helped into the back of a patrol car, not arrested but detained for questioning, as Kowalski insisted on calling it, the footage had already reached 4,000 views. At the station, Kowalski filed his report with practiced ease, describing an aggressive elderly male who had physically obstructed a lawful stop. He didn't mention the wheelchair ramp. He didn't mention that Marcus had never raised a hand. He signed his name at the bottom, confident, as always, that his father's old connections would smooth over any consequences. He had no idea that the man he'd just tased had spent 2 decades learning exactly how corrupt systems protected themselves, and exactly how to dismantle them from the inside. 2 days later, a woman named Special Agent Vivienne Marchetti walked into the Millbrook Falls Police Department carrying a slim black folder. She didn't wear a uniform. She didn't raise her voice. She simply set the folder on the front desk and asked to see Chief Daniel Novak. "I need everything you have on an incident that occurred Sunday morning outside St. Augustine's Chapel," she said. "Specifically, an incident involving Officer Ryan Kowalski." The desk sergeant blinked. "Ma'am, that's a local matter. Nothing federal about a taser complaint." Marchetti's expression didn't change. "It became federal the moment your officer detained one of our people." The sergeant's brow furrowed. "One of your... I'm sorry, what?" "Deacon Marcus Delacroix," she said simply, opening the folder just enough to reveal a photograph. A much younger Marcus, in a federal jacket, standing beside 2 other agents outside a courthouse in Cleveland. "He's not just a deacon, Sergeant. He built half of this bureau's corruption task force, and right now, half of Washington is asking why one of our most decorated retired agents was thrown to the ground outside his own church." For the first time since the incident, the wheels of consequence had begun turning. Quietly, methodically, exactly the way Marcus had once trained his own agents to work. But the full truth was still buried. And in Millbrook Falls, one more secret was about to surface. One that had nothing to do with the taser, and everything to do with why Kowalski had really been parked outside that church in the first place. Chief Novak, rattled by Marchetti's visit, called Kowalski into his office that same afternoon. "You want to explain to me," Novak said, sliding the case file across the desk, "why you tased a retired federal agent over a parking complaint." Kowalski's confidence cracked, just slightly. "I didn't know who he was." "That's not the point, Ryan. The point is, you didn't need to use force at all." "He wouldn't back down. He asked you to move your car," Novak snapped. "That's it. That's the whole altercation." For the first time, Kowalski felt something unfamiliar. Fear. His father wasn't chief anymore. His usual safety net was gone. And now federal eyes were on the department. That evening, Kowalski drove to his father's house, hoping for reassurance. Instead, he found something worse. A stack of old case files his father had kept hidden in a storage box. Files connected to a string of unreported, aggressive stop complaints going back 3 years. Complaints his father had personally buried using his old rank. Kowalski wasn't just facing consequences for one incident. He was standing on top of a pattern his own father had helped hide. A pattern that Special Agent Marchetti's team was now beginning to uncover, piece by piece. And somewhere in that stack of files was a name that would connect everything. A young officer's complaint, filed and quietly deleted 2 years earlier, from a woman named Officer Naomi Castellano, the only person on the force who had ever tried to stop Kowalski before. Marcus sat in his kitchen that evening, ice pack pressed against his shoulder, listening to his granddaughter read aloud from her history homework, her voice trembling with something unspoken. "Grandpa," Elodie finally said, setting the book down, "were you scared? On the ground, I mean." Marcus considered the question carefully, the way he considered everything. "I was more scared for you," he admitted. "You were standing right there. I didn't want you to see me like that." "I've never seen you scared of anything." He smiled faintly. "I was scared once before, the night before your grandmother's surgery. I remember standing outside that hospital room for 6 hours, and I couldn't do a single thing to help her. But she got better. For a while," he said softly. 2 more good years. That's when I left the bureau. I wanted my last years with her to be ordinary. No badges, no danger. Just chess and coffee and Sunday service. Elodie reached for his hand. "Is that why you never told anyone what you used to do?" "I didn't want to be defined by it," Marcus said. "I wanted to be defined by showing up, by sweeping the steps, by being here for you." He looked down at his badge, sitting on the kitchen table where he'd placed it after returning home. "But some things," he said quietly, "you can't outrun forever." The following week, small pieces of evidence began surfacing, quietly, carefully, the way Marcus himself had once taught younger agents to build a case. Officer Naomi Castellano, still employed but sidelined for 2 years after her original complaint against Kowalski was buried, reached out to Agent Marchetti with copies of the reports she'd kept hidden on a personal drive. "I filed this after he tased a 16-year-old for skateboarding on private property," Naomi said, sliding a folder across a diner table. "Nothing happened. My complaint just vanished." Marchetti nodded, adding it to a growing stack. Meanwhile, security footage from a nearby gas station showed Kowalski's patrol car parked outside St. Augustine's Chapel nearly every Sunday for the past 2 months, far more frequently than any noise complaint would justify. A subpoenaed record from the department revealed something stranger still. Kowalski's father, retired Deputy Chief Walter Kowalski, had once been investigated and cleared suspiciously fast for accepting payments from a local towing company that profited whenever officers issued unnecessary citations near the church's public parking lot. Marcus's church sat on valuable real estate the town council had quietly been trying to acquire for a redevelopment project for over a year. Every unnecessary stop, every citation, every excuse to intimidate churchgoers away from parking there. It wasn't random. It was pressure. Slow, deliberate pressure to make the congregation feel unwelcome, to drive down attendance, to eventually convince the church board to sell. And Ryan Kowalski, without fully realizing the scope of what he was part of, had become the loudest instrument of that pressure. The final piece was still missing. But Marcus, watching the pattern unfold from his kitchen table, understood exactly where to look next. Because he had built his entire career finding exactly these kinds of hidden threads. The town hall meeting 3 weeks later was packed beyond capacity. Marcus sat in the front row, Kane resting against his knee, Elodie beside him, as Special Agent Marchetti stepped up to the podium alongside Chief Novak. 2 months ago, Marchetti began, an elderly deacon was tased outside his own church for asking an officer to move his vehicle. What we've since uncovered is far larger than one bad interaction. She clicked to a slide showing internal towing company records. Officer Ryan Kowalski's father, former Deputy Chief Walter Kowalski, accepted repeated payments from Falls Towing and Recovery in exchange for encouraging aggressive enforcement near St. Augustine's Chapel. Enforcement designed to discourage congregants from parking there as part of a private effort to devalue the property ahead of a redevelopment bid. Gasps spread through the room. Officer Kowalski himself, Marchetti continued, was responsible for at least 11 documented incidents of excessive force over 3 years, every single complaint quietly buried through his father's remaining influence in this department. Ryan Kowalski, seated near the back in plain clothes, stared at the floor, his face pale. Then Marchetti turned toward Marcus. And this man, Deacon Marcus Delacroix, isn't only a respected member of this community. He spent 22 years as a senior federal agent, specializing in exactly this kind of institutional corruption. It was his instincts, his notes, and his original case files from decades ago that helped this investigation move as quickly as it did. The room turned toward Marcus in stunned silence. Reverend Whitfield, standing near the side aisle, whispered, "All this time?" Marcus rose slowly, leaning on his cane. "I didn't come back to this town to be a hero," he said quietly. I came back to sweep the steps of my church and watch my granddaughter grow up. But when you attack a place of worship to serve private profit, you're not just breaking the law. You're breaking trust. And trust, once broken, takes far longer to rebuild than any parking lot ever will. The room erupted into applause. Ryan Kowalski sat frozen, finally understanding the full weight of what he had done, and who he had done it to. The consequences arrived swiftly. Deputy Chief Walter Kowalski was indicted on charges of bribery and abuse of office, stripped of his pension, and barred permanently from any position of public authority. Ryan Kowalski was terminated from the Millbrook Falls Police Department within the week. Federal charges followed for civil rights violations connected to the excessive force pattern uncovered in Naomi Castellanos' original complaints. At his hearing, he sat silently as victim after victim, citizens he had intimidated over the years, read statements describing exactly how his arrogance had shaped their fear of law enforcement. Judge Eleanor Castellano, no relation to Naomi, though the courtroom noted the coincidence with grim irony, addressed Kowalski directly before sentencing. "You mistook a badge for permission," she said. "It was never permission. It was responsibility. You failed that responsibility again and again, and today you finally answer for it." Falls Towing and Recovery lost its municipal contract entirely. The redevelopment bid targeting the church's property collapsed under public scrutiny, and the town council issued a formal apology to St. Augustine's congregation. Sergeant Curtis Halverson, the only officer who had consistently tried to hold Kowalski accountable, was promoted to lead a newly formed oversight division, one built, at Marcus's quiet recommendation, to ensure complaints could never again disappear into a drawer. Naomi Castellano received a formal commendation for her courage in preserving evidence others had tried to erase. And Marcus Delacroix, standing once more on the steps of his church, the same steps where he had fallen weeks earlier, watched as the wheelchair ramp he'd once defended was finally repaved, this time with a small brass plaque reading, "For those who show up quietly and stand firm when it matters." Justice, in Millbrook Falls, had not come from anger. It had come from patience. The same patience Marcus had spent a lifetime teaching his granddaughter over a chessboard. Sunday service returned to St. Augustine's Chapel 2 weeks later, fuller than it had been in years. Word had spread, and neighbors who hadn't attended church in decades filled the pews, eager to see the deacon who had quietly reshaped their town's future. Reverend Whitfield opened the service by asking Marcus to say a few words. Marcus stood slowly, adjusting his jacket, the same jacket that had once concealed a badge no one knew existed. "I spent a long time believing I had to choose between two lives," he said. "The one where I protected people from a distance, and the one where I simply lived among them. I learned something this year. Real protection was never about badges or authority. It's about showing up every single day, even when no one's watching." Elodie sat in the front row, beaming, no longer frightened by the memory of that Sunday morning, but proud instead. After the service, Officer Naomi Castellano approached Marcus outside, sunlight catching the new brass plaque by the ramp. "Thank you," she said, "for making sure my reports finally mattered." "Thank you," Marcus replied, "for keeping them safe long enough to matter." Even Sergeant Halverson stopped by that afternoon, no longer in uniform, sharing coffee with Marcus on the church steps, like old friends discussing nothing more serious than the weather. The wounds of that Sunday hadn't vanished completely, but respect had been restored, not through revenge, but through truth finally reaching the light. And for the first time in months, Marcus Delacroix felt at peace, exactly where he belonged. Final CTA. So, where are you watching this from? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. I truly do read as many as I can. And tell me, what was your favorite moment in this story? Was it the reveal at the town hall? Or the quiet ending on those church steps? Would you have done the same thing Marcus did, staying silent all those years, just to live an ordinary life? If this story moved you, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes justice is still worth waiting for. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.